Now, I'm a theoretical economist by training and inclination, and I'm very proud of being an economist. But I've discovered as I've grown older and older that inside every economist is a national accountant trying to get out. Now, I've actually emerged out, no question about that. So, having mentioned the fact, recognized the fact, at the end of the day, as was expressed a few minutes ago, national accounts are always going to be incomplete. I'm going to start at the reverse end by imagining that it is possible to have a complete set of accounts. And of course, I'll have to explain what I mean by it. The advantage of the route is that when we, in life, cut corners, as we have to, we will know which corners we are cutting and why, and what the costs might be. What the plausible orders of magnitude of the missing items are, which, if they are large, will make us look some more. I will suggest as I go along that up to a point, the framing of accounts, no matter how tight the theoretical reasoning underlying it they may be, or there's an element of discretion. And I want to come back to that issue with a particular illustration from work that I've myself been engaged in. So these are the introductory remarks, okay? I'm going to now presume a Platonic kind of a world where incompleteness is not a problem. And then, of course, we will learn why we are forced to accept incompleteness, and so forth. I don't have to stress in this distinguished audience of the imperfections of the world that we face. That will be banal for you all. You're the experts, I'm far less so. But what I can do is to share with you the underpinning of national accounts, as to why, at least one set of reasons as to why we need accounts. National accounts are descriptors. They describe, in some form, and in full form, the state of affairs in an economy as they currently are. But of course, underlying them is also a message about the shape of things to come in the future. It's done through, obviously, through remarks on investment. Investment is an activity undertaken to expand capacity, which presumably is done in order to provide for a better life in the future. So the future is embedded in current national accounts, and I'll come back to this issue in a big way as I go along. There are many reasons as to why one needs national accounts. I'll focus on one which has already been echoed in the introductory talks, which is the basic grammar, or the basis on which policy is constructed and assessed. And I'll be working through the policy avenue to design the set of national accounts that we want. I should say one thing. I keep on using the word national, largely because that's how it has been used earlier this morning. But accounts can be, of course, households have accounts too. So when I talk about an economy, which I will be, from now on I'll try and avoid the word nation and talk about an economy, you could think of the economy as a household, you could think of it as a village, you could think of it as a district, a state, a nation, and sometimes, of course, we talk about the global economy. Nothing I say really hinges on the level at which we're discussing it. It turns out, in fact, it will be easiest at the global level, because in some sense you have integrated the whole lot. And many things which are exogenous for a household are, of course, endogenous for the global economy. So the exogeneity and indigeneity distinction is at the heart of the level, the unit that you choose for your study. But accounts very often are at the national level, so at the back of my mind I'll have national accounts. say, the economy could be something much lower down. Within policy, there are two types of policy discussions that are prevalent. When I was a youngster, the kind of policies that we were taught to learn bore on optimality. What kind of projects should we choose? What sectors to put investment in? That kind of question. And of course, in an ideal world, you'll have chosen then in an optimal pattern. So the theory of optimum growth was designed to explain, answer that kind of question. More recently, the attention has turned to sustainability as opposed to optimality. And we talk about sustainable development. I will want to argue in a few minutes, I'll try and in fact show you, that the two are effectively the same, but they have two different entry points. Each is concerned with perturbing an economy and assessing whether the perturbation is a good thing or a bad thing. Okay? When you choose a potential project, a feasibility report arrives on your desk, and you are asked by your boss whether you think it's a good idea to accept the project or not. It's a standard problem that takes place in government. And you have to write a report. If you accept the project, then the trajectory in the economy would be following would be slightly different from the one it would be following if you weren't to accept the project. So essentially you're assessing a perturbation to the economy that's to be undertaken at the date the project is initiated, maybe 2013. Sustainability analysis is a slightly different outcome. The word sustainable suggests to you maintenance. So an object is sustained if it doesn't diminish over time. So the dimension here is the perturbation is a movement through time. You're asking yourself, is the economy in some sense as good as it was last year? Or the policies that we're currently thinking of following, are they likely to make the economy better or worse next year as opposed to what it is this year? So it's a comparison over time. So the motivation that you have in mind in assessing when you discuss sustainability is pure motion over time. You're not actually undertaking a policy, you're just waiting and seeing, or you have a forecast and you're asking whether in some sense the economy will be better off than it is today. Better off in what sense? The Brundtland Commission report in its famous 1987 book defines sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs, unquote. That's a direct quote. Needs are, of course, a very weak welfare notion. It doesn't say whether the development that is sustainable is optimal. It's a different notion. But it does suggest, and that's why I quoted it, that what they have in mind is the protection and promotion of the productive base of the economy, the wherewithal with which the future generations can carry out their lives as compared to us. We have inherited a set of capital assets from the past, which I'm going to call the productive base. And the question is, are we leaving behind for the next generation? Maybe generation, of course, is a metaphor here. We've been thinking in terms of a decade, or we've been thinking in terms of a year, or sometime as in perspective planning in the Indian government, within the Indian government, maybe a 25-year lead time. And you're asking whether the productive base that you're leaving behind is as high, as large, relative to the population, of course, to what it is today. Of course, that leaves open the question of what the productive base means. We know something like a set of capital assets, but how do you aggregate them into a figure which enables you to compare today's and tomorrow's and day after's. So that's question number one. But question number two seems to be, to me, to a theorist, and a welfare economist, even more pertinent. Why start with a productive base? Should we not actually be thinking in terms of well-being of current generation and future generations in some aggregate form, in some way which we accept that society consists not only of people who are alive today, but those who will be coming in the future, our children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and so forth. Demographic statisticians are making forecasts of future numbers, and there is a case, there's a very strong case for ensuring that something like the potential well-being of future generations and the current one is maintained. So we might refashion the notion of sustainable development, not in terms of the maintenance of the productive base, but we could start instead by asking what kind of policies or how do we ensure that our well-being across the generations, including us in the future, is maintained as we move through time. As we move through time, the past, of course, disappears. They're dead. There's nothing we can do for them, but there's not a lot of future there. So it's almost like a moving train. You move through time, you're losing some people as they disappear, but then, of course, there are people to come at the indefinite future. And you want to see whether the entry point of well-being would be to see whether something like well-being across the generations doesn't decline as you move through time. That's a tall order, but it's mandatory, because the ultimate objective of government policy, of any kind of policy, presumably has to do with human well-being, and that's what you're trying to capture here. The question then arises, is there a connection between the two? The Brundtland notion, basing the analysis of sustainable development on maintenance of the productive base, and basing the ideal sustainable development in terms of the maintenance of intergenerational well-being. Notice whether or not there is a connection. Looking at GDP as a cost potential connection is not going to work. And the reason is that in GDP, the Baroque word is gross. Gross means that the depreciation of capital, which is, of course, would be a part of what constitutes movements of the productive base, is not accounted for. So we know in advance that GDP is not going to work as an indicator, one way or the other. There are many virtues of GDP, no question about it, and if we have time, we can discuss these virtues, but as a welfare measure, it won't work, and we know in advance it won't. Not simply because it ignores distributional issues. That's easy to get rid of, that problem. It's easy theoretically because you say, well, why not include then some distributional indicators, maybe the Gini coefficient and so forth, which we typically do. So that's not a problem. That's not a real problem. The real problem is there are missing items of very critical magnitude, and of course it has to do, a great deal of it has to do with the depreciation of natural capital, which is where we start our conference. Now here's the result. It turns out, fortunately, that the two ways of defining sustainable development turn out to be the same. It turns out